Okay, there was one hand up. There was, okay, yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
My name is David Tavares. I'm currently an employee here at FIU, work for Division of Human Resources, and there is a policy against USBs. Don't use USBs. And so, my question is short and simple. I just heard that accessibility was referenced multiple times, and I just wanted to know what your definition of digital accessibility looks like, and if you could provide an example of that.
Digital accessibility, principally it has to deal with, or has to do with, people's ability to, I hate to use the word access in defining it, to access these technologies, and not just have the technology, but all different types and groups of people having equal access to the technology, or some groups not being disenfranchised because of any innate characteristic of the group, right? So digital access is about that, bringing technology to people so that they have access at all levels, essentially, and all different groups and types of people, and that people are not disenfranchised. It also has to deal with how people use technology to access government, right? So in that conversation, we talk about the pathways that technology creates to access different arms and parts and functions of government, right? And so people's ability to access the technology and the ways in which the technology catalyzes access to different parts and different services in government. Access also has to do with what we call the friendliness of the technology itself, so that the technology is not so technical that it disenfranchises some groups, right? Or it's not so technical that some persons can't really access it, because to have a phone in your hand is not access enough. You have it, but being able to utilize it is really access. So giving people access to knowledge and information that allows them to use the technology is where access really happens. And so the physicality of access is one dimension, but behind that, the ability of people and persons to be able to utilize the technology, because you have given them the tools to really optimize their physical access of it. So access starts sometimes at physically having access, but it also has to do with giving people the additional resources to be able to optimize that access.
So you were hesitant to give the definition, but I think you gave a really good one. Yeah. So thank you. I'm going to start wrapping up the panel. I think it was a really successful panel. We had a majority decision by the audience and the panel that artificial intelligence is not neutral. So now you can battle everyone out there who says it is. We had some glimmers of hope about technology helping democratic resistance, for instance, in Venezuela. And I think we'll hear a lot more about Venezuela, at least in our luncheon. I'm going to offer the three of you up, maybe for the audience for follow-up questions. I think we'll be around in these rooms, and we had a really active audience, and all three of you like to talk, so we couldn't get to all the questions.
Mike the most.
And obviously, thank you to the panelists, FIU, and its partners for organizing.
No? Oh, wait. No, okay, can you hear me? Okay, great. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. So, when you're ready, sir.
You mean right now? Right now. Hello, everyone. We have some big shoes to fill. It was an excellent panel, and the questions from the students were amazing. Thank you for that. I'm Besiki Kutataladze. Can you hear me better now? I'm the criminology professor here at FIU. I've been here for 9 years. Mainly specializing in prosecutorial decision-making, but because I'm a fellow Georgian, I got invited to make this incredible presentation today. So we'll be speaking about the critical state of democracy in Venezuela. As all of you know, before 1999, Venezuela was considered a relatively stable liberal democracy. However, under the authoritarian rule of President Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro, political rights and civil liberties have been severely eroded. In the most recent elections, the government did not merely crack down on the opposition or misuse state resources for electoral advantage, something that probably we'll talk about this, how it happened in Georgia too. The election was outright stolen. Evidence presented by Maria Corina Machado, including vote tally sheets and findings from the UN fact-finding mission in Venezuela, confirmed that the electoral administration was ordered to announce a result that did not reflect the true vote cast. This blatant manipulation of the electoral process underscores the collapse of democratic institutions in the country. We'll learn much more about this crisis and its larger implications for Venezuela, region, and perhaps the world, because the world is watching, from our lunchtime speakers. Damon Wilson is the president and CEO of the National Endowment for Democracy. Maria Corina Machado won the Venezuelan opposition primaries in October 2023, but was banned from participating in the 2024 election on spurious grounds. Due to threats from the Maduro government to arrest her, she remains in hiding and will be joining us today via Zoom from an undisclosed location. We'll also hear from our very good friend and FIU fellow, the teaching professor in the Department of Political Science, Ofelia Requeses, who is also a fellow Venezuelan. And before I switch to you, Damon, I want to say that the people are watching what's happening in Venezuela very closely. Even I was in Georgia last month where people were talking about Venezuela. This was not a country that was ever discussed in Georgia because of our geographic distance. But the very similar experiences are happening in the country, and the empathy towards the opposition in Venezuela is very strong. So I don't know what we're going to do. We have to stand up and fight and prevail. And how we're going to do that, I think we're going to hear today from these amazing speakers. Damon, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to be back at FIU. I'm Damon Wilson, the president of the National Endowment for Democracy. And first, let me just give a shout out to our Georgian friends. Georgians taking inspiration from Venezuelans. This is what we need around the world today. Dr. Kutateladze, thank you for kicking this off. I want to acknowledge what FIU has been doing with this focused conversation on democracy at the Green School. Thanks to Dean Shlomi Dinar Pedro, David Kramer, one of the originators of this, and doing this now in partnership with the George Bush Institute, as well as the Hjalmarsson Foundation and all of our friends who are here from Sweden. It's a really important moment for this conversation. And the conversation we're going to have in a few minutes when Maria Corina Machado can join us puts this at the center of the issue of freedom today. Can democratic forces who do everything right succeed, or will they keep the boot on their neck and stay repressed? This is a consequential moment. Maria Corina Machado is the face of freedom today. Her success or failure is not just about Venezuela. It's about the cause of freedom and democracy and its trajectory over the coming years. So while we're waiting for her to come, I just want to add some context because I run something called the National Endowment for Democracy. We essentially are America's Foundation for Freedom. We are a private foundation that was created by President Reagan, founded through the NED Act, through the U.S. Congress, to really ensure that the American people would stand by those who seek freedom around the world. It was really premised on the idea that this was in America's long-term interest for there to be greater democracy and freedom around the world. As small d Democrats succeeded in their own countries, man, that would be good for the United States. And that was the founding ethos that led to the creation of NED. What it means today is that we provide small grants to more than 2,000 amazing freedom fighters around the world, nonviolent, peaceful freedom fighters, in over 100 countries. But it's not just that simple. It means for 20 years, we've been on the ground supporting the ground game, like in Venezuela, in 80 countries. That means long-term relationships of trust in which these folks who take great risk know that they have Americans that aren't doing the work for them. They're doing the hard work, and we're saying, we got your back, we're with you. We're going to give you a little bit of support. It is what I call the ground game for freedom, the ground game for democracy, and this is America's ground game of pro-freedom allies all around the world that are struggling against oppression. How many of you have heard of Mahsa Amini from Iran? Have you heard of this young woman who was killed because of not wearing her headscarf the right way, because of the morality police? The only reason we know of her story, a story that could have been lost outside of Tehran, is because of an Iranian group that we have the honor of supporting, the endowment supports, that captured her story and told that story so that it got out to the world. And when it got out to the world, it reverberated back into Iran, and we see women, life, freedom, honoring her sacrifice. It wasn't a unique story. It wasn't an exceptional story, but it got documented and told because of support that the American people helped provide, very modest support to an Iranian group that covered it. How many of you know about a Uyghur genocide, a genocide against the Uyghur communities in the People's Republic of China? 20 years ago, the world really only knew Uyghurs as Muslim terrorists. The Chinese were saying 9/11 terrorism, we've got our own. These Muslims are terrorists here in China. Because of over 2 decades of support that the National Endowment of Democracy has provided, the American people standing by nonviolent, peaceful Uyghurs, they have been able to tell their story, document the abuses, and help show and convince the world that they're being repressed as a people, women sterilized, incredible drop in birth rates in this part of China, and a recognition that a genocide has been taking place against their people. That story plays out over and over. La Prensa in Nicaragua, telling the story of Cubans getting visas to Nicaragua, coming to the United States because of American support through NED to support La Prensa's continued publication after the Ortega regime repressed and crushed and forced them all out of the country. And if you think about this historically speaking, democratic transitions from a military dictator, Pinochet in Chile, from Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines, from communism in Poland, solidarity support, to an anti-apartheid regime in South Africa. In each one of these historic cases, these people power movements were driven by the people themselves. But as they were doing this, they had the support of American institutions through the endowment to help with developing parliamentary skills, political party development, civic engagement, so that when these transitions happened, the people of Chile or South Africa, they weren't bitter against the United States for having had government relations with their military dictators, because they knew all along that the American people stood by their side and supported them. That's what we do. We ensure that the American people are known, no matter what our policies are as a government, that the American people are known by standing by those who seek freedom, by making small investments with big impact. We were founded 40 years ago at a time when freedom did not feel like it was on the march, when communism was expanding, Soviet proxy battles around the world, military juntas were reigning in much of the developing world. And yet President Reagan stood up in a inflection speech, a speech that became an inflection point in the trajectory of freedom to challenge totalitarianism. And he said, look, we don't need to think that democracy is a fragile flower, but we do need to know we can't take it for granted. We need to help nurture and cultivate it and provide modest support so that others have the same right to pursue their fundamental freedoms. And he also had the audacity at the time to say Marxism-Leninism will find its place on the ash heap of history one day because of these internal vulnerabilities, because of the lack of a self-correcting mechanism. This is what actually helped propel 4 decades of American support for things like freedom and democracy around the world. Building on the tradition of labor, the endowment started to do this with a way that brought in Democrats, Republicans, business, labor, that supported civic leaders, that supported independent media, rule of law, recognizing that democracy isn't about one constituency, it's not about outcomes, it isn't about one election. It's a more diverse concept that we have a privilege of being able to support. With a theory of change that's really built on amazing people. Scout, remarkable people with courage, we're going to see this shortly, the best ideas, support them within an ecosystem where you've got business, labor, you've got media, you've got others that are helping to affect democratic change on the ground inside a country, and connect them to greater assets where they need help, where the challenge gets too tough. That's what we see in Venezuela today. Probably 20, 30 years ago, Maria Corina Machado would be leading Venezuela today. Nonviolent civil resistance movements had an incredibly successful track rate, people power movements, of helping to empower people and put Democrats in power. What we've seen over the past 20, 30 years is not just a democratic recession. We've seen the dictators learn, an authoritarian resurgence, using technology that we just talked about, facial recognition, state surveillance. President Xi Jinping is perfecting the repression algorithm. And we've seen them now work together to back each other up so that when you're a dictator, an autocrat breaking these rules, you actually have backup. You've got a group of friends, Autocracy Inc., to provide some protection, to erode the sense of accountability. And that's why today's challenge, that's why she is going to be joining us momentarily in hiding. So as we come to this, we're having this conversation. We're going to hear from a real freedom fighter at a time when our country is debating, what is our role in all of this? And I would argue that if you think about modest support that the United States can provide to courageous Democrats around the world, this is probably, I would argue, the most cost-effective national security strategy for the United States. When there is success, not that Americans have to go over to other countries and impose our democracy and do the work for them. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about Iraq and Afghanistan of invading countries. We're talking about finding remarkable people on the ground who are taking the risk themselves and saying, we believe in you. We're going to give you a little bit of support. When they succeed, when democracy advances, this is really good for American security. This when we see dictatorships flourish, as we see in Venezuela, conflict reigns, drugs proliferate. This is now a mafia, kleptocratic drug state we'll talk about in Venezuela. Immigration flows, conflict with neighbors happens. Everything that we have to spend money on to protect our borders, to protect our security, begins to be mitigated as freedom flourishes. So if we want to be smart about it over the long term, we've got a big debate on foreign assistance, what are we doing? If we want to be smart about it, understanding that modest support for freedom fighters is one of the most effective ways to protect our own country in the future, that's what's at stake today. And that's why the conversation we're going to have is really about venture capital for freedom, playing on our strength of being small investments with big impact, and doing so in often the toughest places. So I'm waiting, Vafeli, to see when Maria Corina Machado is going to join. But before we transition into that conversation, with Maria Corina Machado, I want to ask a Venezuelan to come up here to set the scene. Ophelia herself, here at FIU, is someone who is actually leading the director of the Havel programs for undergraduate certificate program here. Someone who's a lawyer, an attorney, a human rights and civil human rights and law professor, whose focus has been on accountability, on transitional justice, on international human rights law. Let me invite you to set the scene before we welcome Maria to the screen.
Thank you, Damon, for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ofelia Riqueses, and I am the Associate Director of the Václav Havel Program for Human Rights and Democracy, which is a proud co-sponsor of this outstanding conference. As a Venezuelan and a human rights lawyer who had to leave the country amid its long-standing crisis, the critical conversation that we are about to hear now has immense personal significance for me. I'm sure it will serve as a reminder of the profound impact that democracy, or the absence of democracy, can have on a country and its people. For those of us who have witnessed firsthand the unraveling of democratic institutions, it is clear that democracy is not simply a system of government. It is a living, breathing entity, constantly in need of vigilance and care. Venezuela was once a beacon of democracy in Latin America. Yet, today, the country is under the grip of a brutal dictatorship, suffering a complex humanitarian crisis that has led to the largest exodus in the region's history, with millions escaping the country's harsh conditions and widespread human rights violations. This is a product of a slow and insidious breakdown of democratic institutions that began in the early 21st century. Larry Diamond, one of the leading scholars on democracy, who has characterized the Venezuelan regime as a threat to the United States' national and economic security, stated that democracy, and here I quote him, is a morally superior system that has proven over time to be more effective at meeting human needs, growing economies, protecting the environment, respecting human rights, and controlling corruption. In addition, it is human nature to seek personal autonomy, dignity, and self-determination. But there is nothing inevitable about the triumph of democracy. End of quote. This warning about the vulnerability of democracy speaks to the reality that we face today, not only in Venezuela, but across the world. The current state of the world shows us that democracy cannot be taken for granted. Once lost, it is not easily regained. When threatened, it must be fiercely protected. That brings me to Maria Corina Machado, whose courage and sacrifice are a powerful reminder of the enduring fight for democracy. To contextualize the challenges that she faces as a leader of the democratic opposition, it is worth mentioning that just a couple of weeks ago, the UN's fact-finding mission on Venezuela presented its latest oral update before the Human Rights Council, describing the pattern of ongoing human rights violations that amount to crimes against humanity, and focusing on the political persecution that intensified after July's presidential election. The mission received credible testimonies indicating that Venezuela's National Electoral Council was politically instructed to announce results different from those expressed by the Venezuelan people at the polls. In addition, arbitrary detention of opposition figures rose ahead of Maduro's illegitimate inauguration in January, and those arrested in the post-electoral crackdown have faced a pattern of prolonged incommunicado detention and enforced disappearances, as well as torture. Maria Corina Machado has assumed unthinkable personal risks and faced extraordinary political challenges in her unwavering commitment to the Venezuelan people's right to freedom and democracy. Her leadership exemplifies the kind of bravery that we all need in the face of authoritarianism. She represents the voice of courage and the embodiment of a struggle that we will forever carry with us, and for that we owe her an enormous debt. Her leadership has given a renewed sense of hope to millions, both inside Venezuela and in the diaspora. It is also a reminder that there are countless others who continue to risk their lives for the restoration of democratic values, and we owe it to them to continue supporting this fight. Equally important, we must honor the resilience of the Venezuelan people. Despite years of brutal repression, they continue to hold fast to the belief that Venezuela deserves better, that it deserves democracy, freedom, and a future that is rooted in justice. Their conviction, their courage, and their unyielding spirit are a testament to the strength of human dignity, even in the face of unimaginable hardship. As we contemplate Venezuela's ongoing struggle, let us remember that the fight for democracy is a global struggle, one that requires the engagement and solidarity of all those who value freedom and human rights. As Larry Diamond puts it, only a clear-eyed recognition of the depth of the peril can generate the necessary will. I'm sure that the urgency and weight of the conversation that we're about to hear will give us much to reflect on, both intellectually and morally. I look forward to hearing Maria Corina Machado and Damon Wilson's insights into the current crisis in Venezuela and the broader challenges facing democracy. I greatly admire them both for their work and their commitment to the principles of democracy, and I thank them for joining this conference. I also want to thank all of you for your participation. It is through our collective efforts, our collective resolve, that we can ensure a future where democracy is a fundamental reality for all. The floor is yours, Damon.
Thank you so much, Ophelia. And with that, Maria Corina Machado, welcome, welcome, welcome. Okay, folks, Maria Corina, you've got an audience here of students at FIU and those who study historic figures in freedom. This is the face of freedom today. This woman is on the vanguard of the fight for freedom in a way that iconic figures in the past you've studied about. She's living it today, joining us from hiding in Venezuela. And I'll try to spare you too much, Maria Corina Machado, but this is someone I think you need to understand really has already played an extraordinary role. Someone who went through, she carries the moral weight of someone who went through a process of unifying a divided democratic opposition, a resounding victory in opposition primaries, winning 93% of the vote, and then leading one of the most extraordinary historic campaigns for democracy and freedom in Venezuela against all odds. She was disqualified. She rallied the people around alternative candidates, finally working with Ambassador Edmundo González Urito, and they won nearly 70% of the votes. Every region of the country, neighborhoods that were considered formerly Chavista strongholds, went for them. And all of this was documented by a meticulous process that she and her team led of gathering over 83% of these tally sheets, you know, the precinct polling tally sheets, to be able to demonstrate to the world not only that they won, but this is the most documented fraudulent election in history. It's the greatest example of fraud, and it's one of the most challenging issues for us today. If every Venezuelan now knows that Maria Corina Machado and her colleagues won, what is wrong? Why are they not in power today? So first of all, Maria Corina, thank you so much. Thank you for your profile and courage. Let me just start with the basics. You're joining us from hiding today. You're in Venezuela. How are you? How is your security? How are your spirits?
I'm fine, and I'm super grateful. And hearing you, Damon, I get so excited, and I say, well, that's why I have to stay here, because you have voices such as yours that keep everybody excited and conscious of what unique process is taking place, because this has been evolving. Well, first of all, I have to thank the Florida International University. I mean, this is such an honor to be here. I want to thank the George W. Bush Institute and the Jar Hal Marson Foundation, and of course, Misiki and Ophelia. You know, listen to our incredible diaspora, the job they're doing all around the world, how they, you know, made Venezuela a global cause. They make me so proud, and I'm so grateful. Of course, you have been one of our main friends and champions during these years, because you understood, Damon, that what was taking place in Venezuela concerned the whole world. Not only because it's, you know, the same values we're fighting for, because it's the same enemies. And the impact in the whole Western Hemisphere that the transition to democracy in Venezuela will have for Venezuelans, and even for the American society in the US. So to answer you, I am fine. I'm working harder than even before the election, which is something hard to explain when you are in a room, you know, small room without any personal contact, which I lack and I miss, certainly. I've been here for 8 months now. I'm, of course, in pain for those Venezuelans that are being brutally harmed at this moment, but I am confident and very optimistic that things are moving in the right direction as we speak.
This is why you're an extraordinary leader, to be confident and optimistic in this situation. So can you take a minute, Maria Corina, and just give us a little bit of an update? What is the situation? We saw the horrific inauguration that Maduro himself put through. The day before, you did an extraordinary mobilization of Venezuelans to challenge that. But we've also seen this come with a real price of probably the highest level of repression that we've seen in Venezuela in a couple of decades. What is the situation right now?
Well, I know that many times you've heard in these past 26 years, which is when the Chavista already have in power, that we are facing the opportunity for regime change, for transition. That we've heard this several times before, and it hasn't happened, certainly. And I do think this is a different moment, a totally different moment from any other we have lived before, and I want to go very fast. Why? First of all, I think that from economic perspective, Venezuela is in the worst situation ever. This has started to decline and accelerate the economic situation much before even the sanctions recently were announced. In terms of hyperinflation, 5 months of 3 digits of hyperinflation, and you see the gap between the official and the parallel exchange rate of over 20%, that this is totally unsustainable. And this is creating more and more social unrest because of the tragic situation of the Venezuelan people from economic perspective, poverty over 80% and getting worse, but also because, the whole population knows that we've been robbed in our decision. So that's one thing. Secondly, I think the regime is more isolated than ever because of what you mentioned, this brutal, unprecedented repression wave, I would say in the whole continent. We're talking about more than 2,000 people detained, disappeared, tortured, children, women, just because they were working as electoral monitors or defended one of those Kalishits you just mentioned. People that get accused of terrorism because they're found in the streets that they have my picture on their phone, and then they are detained, disappeared, and accused of terrorism just because of having a picture. So this wave and the manner the world characterizes as crimes against humanity and practices of state terrorism has further and further isolated Maduro to the point that even Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, that used to be former allies, they don't want to get involved. They don't want to get close because Maduro is toxic. Just see what happened last week when we had President Boric from Chile send his foreign minister to the International Criminal Court to present evidence of how Diosdado Cabello gave orders to the Tren de Aragua to kill a dissident, military dissident in Chile. This is huge. And on the other hand, then you see what used to be the countries that supported Maduro in previous crises. Syria, not in good shape. Iran, you tell me if they are willing or able to do that. Russia, probably not, looking for another, problem with the US. And finally, China, which I believe that does not want to get into a trade conflict or escalation with the US because of Venezuela. So the regime is in very bad shape internationally. And finally, I would say that in internal structures, this is a criminal structure. This is not a conventional dictatorship. And it's very important to understand this because you have to address it from a law enforcement approach. And that's why I believe the recent decisions of the Trump administrations are correct because they cut the resources, you create tensions and eventually fractures among these structures. So I think this is a totally different moment. We have a huge opportunity and there's momentum growing.
Terrific. Thank you for sharing that analysis. I think you said something really important, sort of the idea that people kind of see, Maduro, this government. And a lot of people talk about sovereignty right now. But to understand, as Maria Corina Machado just said, that this is really a mafia, drug cartel run regime. It's a kleptocratic regime. And to think about sovereignty belongs with the people of Venezuela. It resides with the people, not some crackpot dictator like you're dealing with. And I think that's an important way to reframe it. But Maria Corina, if we can just back up a moment, because we're here with folks that are interested in the state of global democracy. What you achieved exceeded everyone's expectations, that in a very unfair environment with repression, with state apparatus control, with intelligence, with all of this, somehow, and without access to media or anything, somehow you managed to mobilize the electorate, the country, to come out and win an election in a very unfair environment. It is a historic feat. Can you just take a moment to tell the audience, how did that happen? How did you achieve that kind of victory?
Well, this is a victory, as I mentioned before, of millions and millions of citizens within and abroad. Because I have to once again give credit to our diaspora that has been huge in making this happen. I remember 2 years ago, Venezuela looked hopeless. And every single person told us it was impossible to bring the country back together on our feet with enthusiasm and hope. They told us it was impossible. And we decided to go beyond that approach from an electoral perspective and understood was not a political fight exclusively. This was existential, a cultural engagement. And I went to places that people say, why are you going there? There are no votes there. Perhaps 50 people, 150, no one in a presidential election would go there. They say, you don't understand. This is about the soul of a nation. This is about, getting everybody involved and committed from a personal perspective. It's not a matter of political parties, it's a matter of citizens, assuming it's individual responsibility. And it changed everything. And at the end, the fact that the regime had intentionally divided our families and pressed and forced almost a third of Venezuelan population to flee turned out to be one of our biggest strengths, because it was all about getting our families together again. And this brought the country together. And yes, we did incredible things using technology, using with the best Venezuelan engineers, and we designed apps so people could get involved. Yes, we were super effective, I think, turning this into a organical movement, because we couldn't pay, not one ad. We didn't have money. I couldn't stay in a hotel and rent a room, because they would come and close it, or close the restaurant where we stopped in the route to I'm not allowed to take flights. I wasn't allowed to fly locally, so I had to go in my car. But this turned into an epic movement that was able to do all the extraordinary things you mentioned, but that has cultural implications that go well beyond getting rid of Maduro. We will get rid of Maduro. He'll get out of power, have no doubt. But the most important thing is how we manage to create a movement around common values, how we value democracy, how we value freedom, how we value our families today.
She hit on a very important point for you as students, that you'll often hear, whether it's from Maduro or whether it's the Chinese Communist Party talking about the Hong Kong protests, or the Georgian government talking about Georgians on the street, they'll say, this is because of the United States. This is because of foreigners. The United States is manipulating. What you just heard her describe was an epic reaction of a people movement in Venezuela. And before the election, I was with some of her aides who were in Washington, and we were meeting with Republicans and Democrats, folks in the administration and Congress. And some on the right said, why are they even contesting these elections? Maduro will never allow a free election. Some in the administration said, yeah, we love all the freedom-loving Venezuelans, but this is hopeless. And I just offer that because the dictators want you to think that it's all made in Washington, that everything that's happening around the world is manipulated from Washington. I have seen so much cynicism in Washington about the inability of democratic change, and have repeatedly seen people like Maria Corina Machado, like Nino, who's here from Georgia. We have seen people-led movements shape their own destiny, and then the question comes of whether we support that or not. So can I come back to you and ask, this is a complex case, because if you back up even beyond your electoral victory, you had Chavez with an electoral victory. How did Chavez and Maduro, his successor, how did they capture what was a relatively prosperous democratic state? This is going to be the topic that we focus on next at this conference, the captured elites. How did Chavez, Maduro, how did they capture Venezuela's democracy and keep?
And you expect me to answer in 2 minutes? Sure. Look, this is fascinating, because it's so tragic, and because we have to learn from it. Venezuela used to be the richest country in the region. I mean, after all, we have the largest reserves in oil in the world, and the eighth in gas. And we had a long-lasting democracy and a vibrant middle class. What happened? At what point democracy failed to deliver it? And people felt excluded. I think these are the kinds of discussions that are very relevant and would require a lot more time. But the fact is that Chavez leveraged on that and this content. Some of it was, had strong support and reasons, and but also he promoted division and distrust among and revenge, and that can be very effective. And finally, well, when Chavez arrived, the price of the barrel of oil was $8, and it increased to over 150. So he was very lucky in that sense too. I mean, he had a huge amount of money that he used to control a country. Of course, they robbed and sacked, and this is probably the biggest, assault in history, in the history of humanity. But this was designed, and it's a recipe that we have seen in many other countries, and you have, early signals that you have to be very careful when you go against the judiciary system, when you use populism and to confront society or to divide society, and when you start weakening the social organizations that can have, can do counterweight to the government. And there, I have to say that freedom of expression is very important. And when you start seeing it being attacked, beware. So that's what they did. And as I say, they managed to create a coalition of other actors that wanted to weaken Western liberal democracies and use Chavez and have used Venezuela as a safe haven for their operations.
That's right. We see across regimes, or the topic we're looking at, when you see the erosion, the capture of institutions, the erosion of democratic processes and norms, how that more than anything begins to help contribute to the backsliding we saw in Venezuela. I want to jump back to a point you made. You were arguing that the Maduro regime today is both weaker and more dangerous. I think it's important to explain a little bit sort of the basis of why you're arguing that, because a lot of people look at Maduro and they see just another dictator, this is a tyrannical regime. But I think the case that you were making is that this is something different. This is a criminal mafia state that's weaponizing the drug trade, that this is something beyond sort of leftist ideology. Can you just unpack that a little bit more to help us understand what's the nature of the regime that you're dealing with, that we're dealing with?
Absolutely. I mean, what we have in Venezuela is a criminal cartel that is in power. And we have to be very clear with this. You have a country like Mexico that has cartels, infiltrating and being fought by the government. Here, the cartels are in power, are in government, and have given Venezuelan territory to different groups, to different networks. And this structure, and I want to be very clear, cannot be contained within the borders of a country. Cannot be contained. Not in this century, not a country like Venezuela. So what does the regime do? They use their liaisons with these criminal groups around the world, the enormous resources Venezuela has, and certainly the drug trafficking networks that have integrated with Colombia and are used in Venezuela today as the main passage. The estimates are around 300 metric tons a year. And the regime, and I want to be very clear, it's in a stage where when they were, taking all the facade away after the election, what emerged was this criminal structure, and they don't care anymore. They don't care anymore to publicly show the things they're doing. As we speak, you see the Zulia state, and this is critical because it's in the border with Colombia. That used to be the wealthiest and biggest state of Venezuela in terms of population, that has turned into the main route for narco and drug trafficking. Just yesterday, the ninth major was disappeared, and she's of the regime party. So 5 mayors from the regime party have disappeared. 4 from the opposition have been taken in prison in the last months because the regime needs to control this territory, and anyone who is not part of that network simply is taken away. So this is critical to understand because we have a window of opportunity to move ahead and to further enforce what are these recent decisions by the Trump administration to cut, the cash flows for the regime.
So maybe we can unpack that part there, because you've described an entrenched sort of criminal state, if you will, criminal cartel that controls the state, and you've referenced the recent Trump administration policies to sort of target that. How do you connect this back to your strategy for democratic transition change? What do you see is the pathway? How are you thinking about the strategy for democratic change in Venezuela post-election, post-inauguration?
This is very important because we are absolutely convinced that this has to be a multidimensional strategy, no integral strategy. I mean, there needs to be strength and pressure and real, credible threats from within. And we have done a lot, as you mentioned, but this has to be accompanied also by concrete actions that can only be taken by the international community, because we're talking about an international structure. I mean, there are agents from Hezbollah, Hamas operating in Venezuela, the drug cartels from Mexico, from Brazil, the Colombian guerrilla, the Cuban intelligence, the Russian agents, the Chinese technology. This is all operating in Venezuela, the Iranians, of course. So we need to do this in coordination and synergy. And that's precisely what we are doing and moving ahead. One of the things that ought to be done is to understand that criminal structure starts to crumble when resources stop getting in. So why, and for what they use these resources? They use the resources they get for repression, to have everybody silent and terrified, for propaganda and terror, and of course for...
All right, we'll give it a shot and see if we can get her back up. It may have been Maduro that pulled the plug. Look, one of the things she's talking about is an incredible, they did everything right inside Venezuela. Everybody in Washington and the international community said, wait, the Venezuelan opposition's divided, they can't form, there was a lot of reason to criticize Venezuelan opposition and point to them as being weak, divided, not attracting voters. They did everything right in this past year, and despite doing everything right, we still have the situation it is today. And this is where the connection between where dictators have learned, started to back each other up. It puts a burden on us. There has to be a ground game, and we'll ask her if we can get this back on. There has to be a ground game, but the ground game needs friends internationally as well. You can hear Maria Karina, you're back on? Aha, okay. All right, so you can hear me. We can't hear you. All right. Whew. I will tell you that the audience was very concerned about your safety there. So it's awesome to see you back. I'm glad the problem's on our end, not yours. I can't remember if we interrupted your thought, but you were beginning to speak about the interplay between the ground game on the ground inside Venezuela, where you did everything right, and yet it's not sufficient. You still need the support from the international community, from the United States. Can you talk a little bit?
Absolutely, that's super important. First of all, we're facing a criminal structure with international network and supporters. How they keep in power, how they stay in power? Through repression, huge structure of repression, very well funded, by a structure of propaganda to terrify the country and mislead the international community, and certainly by corruption, which is what maintains these different groups together, making huge amount of money. When they stop getting resources, both from what is to be legal, let's say licenses, oil licenses, or criminal networks, the black market of oil, gold smuggling, money laundering, prostitution networks, and so on. When they stop receiving those resources, then they get less money for repression, less money for propaganda, and within the regime, they start fighting among them. And tensions turn into fractures. So we need that to take place. When we increase the cost of repression, and that will happen if they get less resources, then we can have our underground movement, which we're working on, if we never stop organizing, assuming more and more visible and stronger pressure from within. And then you have a criminal, then you have a real credible threat that will force them to accept that they have no other option but a transition. So that's the strategy, and it's working as we speak.
So Venezuela has long been a priority of Marco Rubio, and I think on his first day as Secretary of State, he spoke to you in a way that he underscored how he cared about the future of freedom in Venezuela. Can you talk a little bit about what you would like to see from the United States, what more the United States can do, and how that relates to what more you want to see other international actors do to support the cause of freedom in Venezuela?
Well, I think that decisions are correct. The approach is the one that can be effective, but these are not isolated actions. It's a strategy. I believe Secretary Rubio is one of the persons in the United States that better understand what's at stake here and what a free Venezuela would mean for the region. Because we will go for Cuba then, liberating Cuba and liberating Nicaragua. And for the first time in a century, we will have a continent free of dictatorship and communism. I mean, this is huge from a political perspective, but at the same time, you have to go to the root of the problem. Where's the migration problem? It's not going to stop if people doesn't feel they have a future in their country. On the other hand, once we move ahead in a transition, we will see millions coming to Venezuela voluntarily, and so on, every other issue. So what do we want? We want to enforce, make that these decisions that we take are truly enforced. Secondly, that more information regarding the criminal structures and liaisons of the regime are made public. I understand there are sealed indictments, that there are processes that have not made public yet, not only by the U.S. justice system, even in Europe, in Latin America. Go after the financial enablers, make those that are committing crimes that they will be held accountable. Have the ICC finally making a decision, International Criminal Court, regarding investigations on Venezuela. So these are concrete actions that are part of a bigger strategy. And meanwhile, we have our incredible diaspora organizing, speaking out, and pressing all around the world for a peaceful, orderly transition to democracy in Venezuela that can take place soon.
Can I just underscore 2 points that you made, because you've made the parallelism between the state and the drug syndicate. In law enforcement, when you're dealing with organized crime, you have to have a network focused on a network, focused, targeted, relentless to take it down. You can't be distracted by 5 other priorities. You've got to stay on it. And so I think the way you've described the Maduro regime and the approach, it does require our support for you to be focused, targeted, nonstop, to help treat it as if we're trying to block the channels of a drug syndicate. You've captured that well. And the second part that's really important for an American audience is that you made the point that 8 million Venezuelans have been forced out of their country. a transactional deal here or there with a dictator doesn't convince millions of people to go home. Fundamentally, they have to be able to live in dignity and safety in their own communities with their families. And I think that's another reason to help people understand here why your success isn't just about your success or Venezuela. It is so important to democratic countries around the world, and the United States in particular. And the opposite of that, maybe I can ask you to play it out. What are the consequences of Maduro succeeding? What does this actually mean for freedom, democracy, for other would-be autocrats, dictators around the world? And can you unpack a little bit, you referenced the Russian, Chinese, Cubans, but help explain how Maduro is not operating in isolation. What's the support he's got, and what are the consequences if he succeeds?
Well, he will not succeed. So we're going to talk about that scenario just for theoretical speculation. But having said that, just see what's going on in the border with Colombia. I mean, that's an area we specialists call the gray area, which and it's an area that is expanding, in which there is no law whatsoever, and even no presence of the Venezuelan state, unless it is there to complement the activities of the guerrilla or the drug networks. This is an area that recently turned into huge confrontation, and there were over 60,000 people were displaced because they are fighting for drug control. And the Venezuelan regime offered our territory for the ELN, the guerrilla, to use and move freely to attack the FARC dissidents. And this great area is expanding not only into Venezuela, but also into Colombia. And this is absolutely dangerous because Colombia is also at stake here. I mean, to dismantle these structures, you need bilateral cooperation. That will never happen with Maduro because Maduro is partner of this group. It's a partner and work together and gets their funding from these activities. That's just to talk about Colombia. Imagine what could happen with Guyana. Imagine what could happen with Brazil, with the islands. I mean, and with the US, because just thinking that you can stop migration, closing routes such as the Darien Gap, and that's not going to happen. People at the end, as you said, when they feel they have no future, their children have no future, they decide to leave, even if that means risking your life. A mother that takes, her baby or leaves them behind because it's the only way that they can survive. So I'm talking about millions of Venezuelans that could be, forced to flee. And this is a disaster for us and for the region. So this is a moment to act. We have never had, and I insist this, a window of opportunity and momentum such as we have right now. If we have spoken a month and a half ago, Damon probably would have said the same thing I'm saying now. I do think there is a clear definition of a policy in the United States that has bipartisan support. That's very important, and we appreciate it deeply. And I think it has the support of the American people, and that's very important for us. And Florida has a huge role to play here because of the enormous and vibrant, not only Venezuelan community, but Latin American community.
So, Maria Corina, we have a few more minutes. I want to ask one more question. If we have time, I might take a couple from the audience if my FIU colleagues tell me I can do that. I just want to come back. We're here at a university, a conference on the state of global democracy. We're looking in, talking about democratic transition. We've asked you about the strategy. We're going to focus on captured elites. But what we're doing and listening to right now is a masterclass in leadership. And I think it's really important. Ophelia, one of the stars of the Venezuelan diaspora who helped introduce you, she helps undergrads go through the Václav Havel undergraduate program here. And you think of someone like Havel, much like Maria Corina today, had to spend a lot of time alone in isolation, questioning, trying to force them to question themselves. Can I just make this a little bit more personal and ask you, like, this is crazy and tough, what you are doing. You've been in hiding for 8 months. A couple weeks ago, I was with Maria Corina, with her daughter, Anna. She's an amazing young woman. She's actually amazing young woman, Maria Corina. You have raised an amazing daughter. But I'm thinking about what it means to have been separated from your family, to be going through this right now. Can you just unpack this for the students who are interested in democracy, but it's about people and leadership? How do you do this? How do you find the strength, the courage, the resilience to fight for freedom in such a difficult circumstance?
It's a very complex question, probably an existential one, because, as I say, I can only conceive my life in freedom and in Venezuela, because I want my children and all Venezuelan children to have a country that they can feel proud about and be happy. And at the same time, because of what I do, I'm harming my family and putting them at risk. My family is all divided as we speak. Oh, my children are in different parts of the world. My husband had to leave a few months ago. My sisters, my mother is totally alone and surrounded by the regime here, and makes you feel very guilty. I talk with the parents or children of my colleagues that are in prison or under asylum, and you feel responsible to some extent. But at the same time, you are able to realize that there's nothing else in the world, nowhere else I would want to be. This gives you sense and to your life, transcendency to your existence. And you have to learn every day to live one day at a time. And it's easy to say, it's hard to do. But I trust so much the Venezuelan people. That's where my strength comes from. I've heard so many times it was impossible to do what we did. I think all my life has been like swimming against the tide. I don't know if you say that in English like that.
Yes.
It's like, why? God, please give us some, some wind from behind. And then we do it. And once you overcome one obstacle, the energy and the pride it gives you, it's strength for the next moment to come. So I am absolutely convinced that Venezuela will be a free, prosperous, bright country. And I thank the Lord every day that I could have been part of this movement, and convinced we're making history. And that what gives me energy to get up every morning and work until very late at night. Thank you so much. You know, I feel that this difficult moment, terrible moment, has brought us Latin Americans much closer. And I would say also us women closer, because at the end, you know, it's a fight for our families and for our values. And I've seen Venezuelan women in the front line, and I've heard all these incredible women from all Latin America reaching out to us. I don't know if you've seen these marvelous videos they have made. And I don't know, this is so powerful. I'm very grateful to the government of the Dominican Republic. We have great support from President Abinader, and I have many friends there in the parliament. And I ask you, please, to reach out to your government, to reach out to other people in the Dominican Republic that have been, I have to say, amazing, receiving our fellow Venezuelans that have been forced to live there. But I want you to know that we want them back here. So thank you for that. And regarding the message to the administration, I mean, keep doing it. Let's get other countries involved as well, engage as well. But most of all, I want to reach out to people that live in the United States, American society, because at the end, it has to do with everything that has defined a country we admire so much, your values for individual freedom, for justice, for families, and for prosperity, dependent on your own dignity and effort. A country that is based on merits and with strong institutions. It has to do with that. And it has to do with having, for the first time, the whole continent, the Americas in plural, being a free, safe, prosperous, bright continent that would be an example for the whole world. That's what we are committed to, and that's what's going on right now. Venezuela is pivotal in making that happen.
That's a great vision. My colleagues have asked for one last question. We're going to do one last question, then we promise we'll let you go. Please.
Well, good afternoon, Ms. Machado. My name is Eugene Bold, and I was born in communist Romania at a time when Romania looked a lot like Venezuela today. There was no food, no freedom, and no dignity. Fast forward to today, Romania is a relatively prosperous country. It's a member of NATO. One of America's strongest allies in Eastern Europe, contributing significantly to the effort in Ukraine. But more importantly, people have hope and joy. And if there's one thing I can tell you is that change is possible, that while God does a lot to orchestrate our events on earth, at least in my opinion, the people of your country will ultimately decide the fate of your country with your leadership. So please don't ever give up hope. Change is possible and will arrive soon.
All right, so that wasn't we're going to stand up and give you a round of applause.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Damon. Thank you, Damon.
You've got a lot of friends here, Maria Corina.
Thank you, Damon. You are great. Well, you are great. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Take care. We'll see you.
Thank you. All right, thanks everyone. Pedro, you tell us what's next? Yeah.
Can you hear me? The next panel will begin at 2. In the meantime, help yourselves to cookies and coffee in the lobby.
Okay. Yes? Yes? Ready to go? Oh, wow. Look at that. Good afternoon. I hope you all had some coffee. I'm Oren Steer. I'm professor of religious studies and director of the Holocaust and Genocide Studies program housed in the Green School. Welcome to this timely and important panel about an issue that's increasingly shaping the political and economic landscapes of countries around the world. The term elite capture refers to the process by which powerful individuals or groups, often with ties to authoritarian regimes, gain disproportionate influence over political, economic, and social systems in other countries. Rather than responding to the needs of the broader population, authoritarian regimes often act in ways that serve their narrow interests. This manipulation can lead to systemic changes that undermine the democratic fabric of a nation. Our panel will explore the many ways authoritarian regimes exercise influence over political figures, corporate leaders, media moguls, and financial power brokers in other countries. We will examine the erosion of political accountability, challenges to democratic principles, and the deepening economic inequality fostered by such manipulations. When elites become beholden to authoritarian interests, they often take steps to diminish the power and effectiveness of democratic institutions, from the judiciary to the media, from civil society to electoral systems. Together, we will explore not only the scale and scope of this threat, but also the potential pathways forward to safeguard democratic integrity and ensure that power remains in the hands of the people. By learning from both the successes and failures of various countries, we hope to identify concrete solutions that can help fortify democracies against the corrosive effects of elite capture. The panel will be moderated by Eduardo Gamarra, a professor of political science in the Department of Politics and International Relations. Eduardo, take it away.
Thank you. I'm just going to stand up for the introductions, and then I'll sit, and I think you'll be able to see me if I stand up. Thank you very much for allowing me to moderate this panel. We have a very distinguished panel of specialists. I will start with my colleague John Clark from the Department of Politics, who is a specialist on African politics. Then Nicole Bibbins-Sadaka from the George W. Bush Institute. Sarah Cook, who is an independent researcher and consultant. And Nina Evegnizi from the Economic Policy Research Center. Did I say it right? Great, all right. Yeah, so you got to get there somewhere. Okay, so thank you for defining this very difficult concept. So I want to begin by asking each of you, right? And perhaps we'll begin with a person that I last introduced with a very practical definition of what does this concept mean?
Thank you so much, first of all, inviting me here, and thank you so much to my very dear friend Pedro doing this conference and continues this like a good tradition talking here in Miami on the global democracy, and all the organizers, Stephen Green School of International Studies. And I'm really fortunate being here today, but I'm not happy to talking about my country, which is that they're facing all the challenges or all theoretical definition, whatever you've read in your entire life in the handbooks, Because unfortunately, we strongly believed before that our existential fight against the Russians for last 225 years, that finally we've became the independent country in 1991, but it never stopped again the Russians, like, you know, the taking our country, and since very early 90s, you know, and we will come to this definition, what does this elite capture means, you know, because the Russians were using these methods all the time, like economic pressure or whatever. And we realized that 1991, one day on the December 31st, just like in the eve of the new year, the Russia cut it, the electricity and the gas supply to Georgia. That was kind of like a sign that it's going to be yet another war, you know. And of course, since now, like after that, I myself went to 4 different wars, you know, because the Georgia, every 10 years we were occupied by Russia, and then they were taking all our territories, and as you know, that 20% of our territory is kind of you know, they're occupied by the Russians, and in a 40 kilometer from the city center of Tbilisi, there are still Russian troops standing there,